Hey guys, the Wolf is back, this time with a little bit more of AP Gov review. We're now into our political culture and media unit, so today we will be discussing American demography and political socialization. Alright, so let's start off simple. What is demography? Demography is the study of human populations and population trends. And in America, we normally figure out these demographic trends through the census. So the Constitution requires that a census be taken, or it doesn't specifically use the word census, but it does mention that we need to count the people accurately every 10 years. This started in 1790, and the most recent census was in 2010. The response rate for the census is not always as high as we'd like it to be. In fact, in 2010 it was at about 72%. And this is not good because the census determines how much federal funds are distributed where for infrastructure and services. The groups that are most frequently undercounted by the census include minorities, low-income households, and children, which are all demographic groups that are greatly affected by the distribution of funds for infrastructure and services. Before we can figure out how to fix that situation, which is a problem which still faces politicians to this day, it might be useful to understand a couple of the other demographic trends that have been observed through this census and through other methods throughout our nation's history. So let's start with immigration. America has often been called a nation of immigrants, a melting pot of various different cultures, and in fact 1 in 10 people currently living in the United States are immigrants according to the Census Bureau, which again may or may not be accurate, but it's relatively accurate. And there have been waves of immigration to the United States from various regions throughout its history. In the early to mid-1800s, it was mostly Northwest Europeans, so Irish, German, think like the potato famine. And then in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as industrialization got started, we took in a lot of Southeastern Europeans. A couple of laws in the mid-1900s kind of stopped that flow from overflowing. And then since the 1960s, we've had a large inflow of Hispanics and Asians. There's been a lot of legislation passed throughout the years since 1875, the first real immigration restriction bill restricting immigration. So again, there was no restriction on immigration legally until 1875, when a law was passed kind of trying to decrease the amount of criminals, prostitutes, and lunatics which make their way into the United States, which frankly I kind of understand that. But then in 1882 came a somewhat more racist act termed the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then in 1924 the National Origins Act reduced immigrant quotas to proportional levels as of the 1890 census. So that really decreased the inflow of immigrants from, for instance, the Southern European regions. However, in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act repealed these restrictive 1924 quotas and increased the emphasis in immigration on family integration, so getting those relatives across the sea or across the border. Now these days, from a legal standpoint, this perspective focusing on family integration continues in immigration, but some argue that the emphasis should instead be placed more on immigrants with special skills and trying to bring those in for the economic benefit of our country. We're not going to be getting too much into that today. I want to move on to the concept of a majority-minority nation, which the United States is projected to become sometime in the mid-21st century. This basically means that non-Hispanic whites no longer make up a greater than 50% of the United States population. I think we're already at just 63% of the population, and California is very nearly, or is already, a majority-minority state. Asians, Hispanics, and African Americans have been increasing both their populations and their political and economic power, especially over the last 50 or 60 years as civil rights things have been going on. However, with some of these groups, particularly Hispanics, illegal immigration has been a factor in population increase. There are a lot of problems with illegal immigration. We see Trump's talk of the wall coming into this. There really has been no significant immigration reform since 1986, which is Not the greatest thing to hear, but these days it's hard to get people in Congress to agree on such divisive matters. Now, though America is a wildly diverse nation these days, there still is this uniting political culture that we share in terms of egalitarianism and laissez-faire and liberty and individualism and all that stuff that we talked about in a previous unit. Although some do view the rise in minorities with concern, claiming that it could lead to increased conflict or hostility between people in America, or conversely to a withdrawal from public life as people get into these sheltered, like-minded communities throughout the U.S. And there are just a couple more demographic trends in the United States I wanted to talk about real quick. The population of the U.S. has been slowly moving from north and east to south and west. And this has a political impact in terms of the reapportionment of House of Representatives seats. So you always have the same number of House of Representatives seats. They just get redistributed according to proportion of population in every state. And after every census, this leads to significantly enhanced or reduced political power in certain states based on how many seats they end up getting. So that is that political impact. And then we're also kind of a rapidly aging population these days. Citizens over 65 are the fastest growing age group in the United States, and this is due to a variety of factors, including medical advances, decline in the fertility rate, and of course the baby boom generation is kind of growing up and entering that senior phase. So this has significant political impacts, particularly in terms of programs like Social Security. I mean, they're a pretty large voting group, these old people nowadays. And they're a pretty large group in terms of our culture as well. Just look at how many prescriptions that are advertised in TV shows. So demography, and its effects on democracy was our main topic for today, but we're also going to be talking a little bit about the process of political socialization. So this is that process through which a person develops their political views and philosophies. And only a small amount of this process is formalized in the United States. The majority of it is incidental or gradually acquired. And it's acquired through family, mass media, and schools. So family plays a significant role in shaping beliefs, obviously, since you spend a significant amount of at least your formative years around your family. And even if they don't directly discuss politics with you, you're still going to kind of pick up on their political views and attitudes. Most people's political beliefs tend to line up very closely with that of their parents. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but this is the general trend. Mass media has also played a role. Although young people tend to keep up with news and politics on the print and digital media less and less these days. So it might be playing a somewhat diminished role in terms of actually educating the public about politics. Schools can also help with political socialization. Obviously, better educated citizens tend to be better political participants, and the texts used in school are often chosen by the government. It is important also to note that aging tends to increase political participation as well as the strength of one's political party attachment. All right, last but not least, here is my Cornell Notes summary for this section. Over the years, as our census records demographic data somewhat successfully, American people have increasingly been minorities, moved south and west, aged, and fluctuated on immigration policies, and each of these trends has its own political implications. On an individual basis, Americans have developed their unique political views influenced by media, family, and schooling in a process called political socialization. Thank you for your time.